So welcome to the Enterpriser podcast. This is Liam Byrne, and we are brought to you today by Peninsula, our official HR partner. And today we're with David Barnett. David is an author, public speaker, and a seminar host. He helps entrepreneurs buy and sell their businesses. He can be found to be contacted about his seminars and how he can help you at davidbarnett.com. And he's also a speaker at the Enterpriser Conference. So
davidcbarnett.com.
Oh, thank you. davidcbarnett.com. I'm going to write that down because I am going to say it again at the end of the show. So thanks very much for joining us. I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, well, hey, it's great to be here, Liam. I back when I got everything set up online, I was sure to include that C, because if you just look for David Barnett online, you find all sorts of nefarious characters, including some that were featured on various Netflix series, and I'm not that guy.
Okay. It's funny because if you Google Liam Byrne, there's a politician in the UK that defrauded the government. There is a mafioso in the UK who is currently on the run from Interpol, and I think there's a model as well named Liam Byrne. I can be found too. You just have to dig a little deeper. I actually put real in front of my name, real Liam Byrne, because I am the real Liam Byrne. You'll find me easier that way. But if you just type in Liam Byrne, you're going to find mafiosos and fraudsters. So there is that differentiation. So I can appreciate the C in the middle of David Barnett.
Yes.
Right. So, David, before we jump into anything too deep, what's new in 2023? What are you working on now?
Well, a lot of the stuff that I do is sort of the same all the time, the work I do with individual clients. But what has really sort of come to life here in 2023 is just getting out and doing live events in front of people again. I used to do that back, before the pandemic hit. And then for a couple of years, of course, nothing was going on. And at the end of last year, sort of December 2022, I started to get more and more email inquiries. And this year, my calendar is just starting to fill in like crazy. So I'm going to be doing some more traveling, more addressing big groups and conferences. And so I'm looking forward to that because I like to get out in front of people. It is quite a bit different than addressing a group over Zoom. I have done some workshops with people over Zoom, sometimes with 30 or 40 people. And it lacks all of that, the beforehand chit chat, the coffee break chit chat, the afterward chit chat, and the short storytelling and stuff. It is a different vibe, and I'm excited to be out there some more.
Yeah, I feel you there. I just did another episode 20 minutes ago with another one of the speakers at the event, and we were talking about there was a lot of things really changed in at the start of 2020. So the Enterpriser is the new brand name for the events that we started producing in 2016 called the Entrepreneurial Development Conference and Expo. And we were gearing up for our third show in Halifax. We had just done a cross-country tour, and I was saying that if it had even been like a month, maybe, if the pandemic had hit like a month later, we would have gone out of business because we just started, like tickets weren't on sale yet, but we just started collecting sponsor money. We were just looking at venues and stuff like that. And it was a very close call, but we did have to do some pretty significant pivoting. Like we added the concept of the podcast, we added the concept of the magazine so that we could have more products for our sponsors because, this may happen again. Who knows, right? And the live events may end again. I also started doing some consulting work as well. I was going to ask you about this later, but since we're talking about it now, how did the consulting industry for you change in the other things that you're doing, public speaking and stuff like that? How did that change during the pandemic? How did you manage that?
Well, it was interesting because during the pandemic, the world discovered, Zoom, but I had been using those tools for many years before. Mm-hmm. So The number one thing that I do with people is I work with buyers and sellers of small and medium-sized enterprises.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that is one-on-one consulting. So I'll work with a buyer who's looking at potentially acquiring a business, work with a seller who wants to get an idea of what their business might be worth and maybe wants my help to put together an evaluation or a buyer-facing package. And a lot of this is it's an extension of the skills and experience I developed back when I used to own a business brokerage. Now I do the same kind of work, but it's under a consulting model. So it's a little bit different how I do things now. But so for 5 or 6 years now, I've been doing this, working with people all throughout the Anglosphere. So I work with people primarily in the States and Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and I also get inquiries from people in other parts of the world. And so when the pandemic hit, everyone kind of came and joined me with what I was doing because I had been doing this for quite some time. In fact, there's one organization in New Brunswick who does small business educational work, and they actually got me to come and do some sessions for their facilitators because they were doing live seminars, and they got my help to help move their content online. Because I was familiar with Zoom. So it was not that big a change, or as I might like to say, I was already positioned for that change.
Okay.
I know that when the big lockdowns happened in 2020, my phone stopped ringing, for the first week, just like most people. I think most people were kind of, stuck in a bit of awe, wondering what was going to happen. But then a week after, things started to get off the ground again, and everyone wanted to know what's going to happen next. What does this do to the value of my business? What does this do to the acquisition I had planned? And we can get into that if you want to, how things unfolded. But I'll tell you, one of the neat things about doing business in different places all at the same time is I can tell you there was quite a variation on how things changed throughout the course of the pandemic, whether you're going to, talk about different places in Canada or California versus places like Tennessee and Texas.
So let's say you were working with a business, their planned acquisition. How did that affect a business who they were in the midst of an acquisition at that point in time? What sort of things took place, and how did they overcome those sorts of things within the pandemic?
Well, there's two kinds of acquisitions you might do. One where you're spending your own money and maybe doing some vendor financing on the part of the seller, and one where you have a bank involved. And so everyone who's doing a deal that had a bank involved, if that bank thought the pandemic and the shutdown in any way would impact the business, then that was being delayed because the banks were suddenly reassessing everything, right? And I deal with a lot of American clients, and down there in the States, they introduced this PPP program. It was a form of government assistance, but they used the banks as the conduit to make these loans. And so all the bankers who would normally be doing lending for acquisition, all of a sudden were doing that program, making those loans for the government. And so I had several cases where deals were about to close, and then they got delayed, and then there was a little bit of a more delay, and then they were re-underwritten. And in some cases, deals were delayed by months and months while people got comfortable with what was going to be happening. And a lot of that had to do with, just seeing that, yes, in fact, the economy was going to come back. There was a lot of fear that when you shut down, by definition, if you shut down a third of the economy, you've put yourself into a recession. GDP has declined, right? Instead of growing. The question was, will it bounce back? And I was of the belief back at the end of 2019 that we were headed into a recession in 2020. I didn't foresee the pandemic or anything like that. But when the pandemic hit, and then all the different governments in all the different places started to spend money like crazy to support business, it kicked off a boom. Let's face it, the economy started to expand. A lot of it was based on, the inflationary pressure of printed money, I think. But now that those economic supports have all ended and things are starting to settle out, I think that this period that we're heading into now is the recession that we should have had before,
Mm-hmm.
but it may even be exacerbated by the fact that we've now got this inflation issue created by those government interventions. So I think, the next year or two are going to be the real interesting times.
Yeah, absolutely. So how are you feeling going into what a lot of people are calling to be the next Great Recession?
How do I personally feel?
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because people will ask me a lot of the times these sort of macroeconomic questions, like how do you think small business is going to do with the economy the way it is?
Mm-hmm.
And the reality is that I don't think that you can really talk about small business as a group, because every business is unique. I mean, every business has its own marketplace. Every business has its own set of employees, its own set of customers. And so just like every other recession, I think that the impacts are going to be uneven. It's going to affect different places differently. It's going to affect even within one city. You could have a flower shop in a part of town where people are more immune to the recession's effects, more government employees, doctors, nurses, retired folks whose income is going to continue regardless of what happens, versus a flower shop in another part of town where people, go to jobs, and those people might be more impacted. So those two flower shops are going to experience the recession differently,
Right.
based on just being in different neighborhoods in the same city.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is a case-by-case thing.
Right.
On my YouTube channel, I get asked questions all the time by viewers who want to know how to navigate these things. And one viewer asked me a few weeks ago what I would recommend as a recession-proof business. And my response is that there is no such thing as a recession-proof business. The best you can hope to do is to buy a business that has really great information so that you understand what's happening in the business very quickly, and that has opportunities to pivot and change. And one of the examples that I gave of pivoting and changing, I don't know if you've noticed this, Liam, in the grocery store, but I've seen my local Sobeys introduce more of these large format packaging options at lower price points. So I can't ever recall them offering, 12 packs of KD, before, but now they do.
Yeah.
And you can tell from the sticker that it's cheaper that way. And so it's more like they're kind of pivoting a little bit to act more like Costco, let's say, because they know that for some of their clientele that all of a sudden the price is suddenly more important maybe than it was last year.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I notice when I walk into the grocery store is that a head of iceberg lettuce is $5.99. That's the very first thing. And I was saying this the other day. I can't remember whom, but I said they've got to stop putting the iceberg lettuce one of the very first things you see when you walk in the store, because iceberg lettuce should not be $5.99. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And it's like I walk in as an angry customer once I start walking around. As soon as I walk into the grocery store, I'm like, I'm now angry because they're charging me $5.99.
I noticed too that. Well, I noticed too, for example, here regionally, the apple section grew through the last couple of years. And to me, that is a sign of supply chain problems, because a lot of the imported things maybe are absent. But of course, we've got lots of apples here in the region, right, from Annapolis Valley. So they were able to expand, the amount of space that the apples take up to kind of fill in those gaps. But throughout the store, I've noticed more and more there's some empty spots sometimes, and you're like, I wonder what's missing.
Yeah, it's true. At the grocery store that I go to, there's like 3 island sections, and either side has produce on it. And now the middle one is literally just apples on both sides and on both the end caps. So it's literally an apple section in the grocery store. Now I know I was listening to another podcast through the summer, and there was a really, really good apple harvest as well this year. Apples were bigger. There were more of them. But yeah, I mean, a few years ago at the same grocery store, there was a significant amount of, there was a lot of tropical fruits and stuff that you just can't find anymore. The melon section was a lot larger. We won't get into the weeds about the groceries too much, but yeah, there is a pretty significant amount of change in the grocery stores, whether it be prices, the formats that they're selling them in. I know that Costco is making all the corporations are hurting because of Costco. And that's because Costco's got a great business concept. And I know that their founder is quite an intelligent guy. So we'll shift gears a bit and bring it back into more of, in your area of expertise. I wanted to kind of get a little bit of, actionable, practical knowledge for the listeners today. So we're going to talk about buying and selling businesses a little bit. So we'll start off with selling a business. What would you say are some of the biggest pitfalls that you've seen entrepreneurs encounter when we'll start with selling a business?
Yeah. So, there are two kinds of business owners. There's the entrepreneur who views their business as an asset amongst many that they own, that they're trying to develop and make as good as they can. And they understand that this is a thing that they may want to sell one day, and they're going to make decisions about that business based on the potential outcomes that they're looking for. In my experience, that's 1 in 10. The other 90% of business owners don't really see themselves as entrepreneurs. They see themselves as being the person who does the thing, whatever it is that their business does.
Yeah.
And so this, relates to that Michael Gerber book, The E-Myth Revisited. And so most people will run their business in the here and now, and they'll make certain decisions that will affect, what their tax bill might be this year. Like, they're very in the moment motivated. You could even literally say this is short-sighted. They're not thinking about outcomes for 5 years. They're thinking about right now what's happening in their business. And the fact of the matter is that most small businesses sell for very low multiples because it's a high-risk asset. And so most of the time, people are not going to be able to build a small business into something that they will become incredibly wealthy with by cashing out, like Mark Zuckerberg will with his Facebook stock, for example. And so one of the pitfalls that I often see is that people will do things that benefit them in the moment instead of making the business look really great on paper.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why people, or the top 5 reasons, the top 5 reasons people put a small business up for sale, number 1 is burnout, fatigue, and boredom. Then there's divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and the last one is retirement. And if you think about those 5 reasons, 4 of them are not planned for. And so what will happen is people will run a business for years and years and years, and then one of those 4 things will happen to them, and they'll suddenly want to sell their business, and now their business doesn't look very good on paper. And so when buyers come along, buyers ask 2 questions. Number 1 is, what is the cash flow? And if you have a hard time demonstrating what the cash flow of the business is, then you're going to have a difficult time impressing a buyer to be able to make a reasonable offer to you. And the buyer is going to have a very hard time impressing upon their lender that this is something worthwhile to make a loan on. And so what happens in a lot of situations is people will operate in a business in such a way that it will be difficult to demonstrate the value of that business to a potential buyer. The second question that buyers will ask is, will this cash flow continue under my stewardship? And so this is where we get into questions of, who do the customers do business with? Do they do business with the business or with the individual that owns a business? Where does the goodwill reside? And are all of the processes and procedures and everything recorded to such an extent that the new owner will be able to fully take over and understand how everything operates and be able to replicate the success of the current owner? And so a lot of businesses will end up in a crisis where the owner will get one of those 4 conditions, burnout, fatigue, boredom, divorce, poor health, the need to relocate. And they won't have the time to fix those things. Like when I work with people who say they want to retire, retirees actually are the least motivated sellers because they often have time. Maybe they're 60 years old and they say, I want to retire when I'm 65. What do I need to do? Well, they've got time to work on these things. And usually we want to fix the problems and then put 2 years of financial statements under our belt with an optimized business, so that then it's very easy for a potential buyer to see what the cash flow is, see that it's a regular cash flow, that the business is going to perform at a certain level and it's sustained itself at that level, versus a business, for example, that had a 50% increase in revenue and profits last year. Now, that's a hard one to sell because buyers are not convinced that either the growth will continue or that the current level will continue. What if it was a blip? What if it was a one-time thing? What if it was one-off, right? But if you have a couple of years of consistent performance, then it's easier for the buyer to believe that it's going to carry on. And it's either easier for them to convince their banker that things are going to carry on. And so the thing that most business owners lack when it comes to selling is the fact that they never put that into a serious context of how they run their business day to day.
Interesting. Okay. Well, then from the opposite perspective, the same question goes, if someone is buying a business, if you're helping someone purchase a business, what are some things that they should be looking for, or what are the biggest pitfalls that they run into when buying a business?
Yeah. So one of the biggest problems that buyers run into is errors that they make in analyzing the business, but more importantly, failing to understand certain things about looking at a business. So I'll give you an example. In the world of buying and selling businesses, we tend to use these what are called notional levels of cash flow. So EBITDA is one of them, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Another one is seller's discretionary earnings, which is just another step back from EBITDA. It includes the owner's own salary or wages if they were to run the business themselves. So the problem is that businesses will be presented for sale with a seller's discretionary earnings or SDE level of cash flow. Let's say that's $100,000. And buyers will look at that and say, oh, if I buy this business, I'm going to get $100,000. Without stopping to properly realize that that cash flow is before the owner takes a pay. So if the fair wage of running a business like the one you're looking at is $70,000, well, you need to take $70,000 off that SDE for yourself. That's what you're going to take home. And then out of that other $30,000, you still have to service the debt that you've taken on to buy the business. And then those other things that we removed, the interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, those are all real things that have to be paid for. Taxes have to be paid to the government. Depreciation and amortization, those represent long-lived assets that wear out over time. And so if the business includes any kind of machinery or equipment that's going to have to be replaced, that comes out of the SDE as well. And so I'll meet a lot of people who will look at a business and they'll look at these broad numbers and think, man, here's an SDE of 200 grand. I'd love to earn 200 grand. And when I point out to them that you won't be earning 200 grand if you buy this business, and we start to break it apart, they begin to realize more accurately what it is that they're getting into. If they have someone like me working with them. And so that's the number one thing is people fail to sit down and create an accurate forward-looking plan. I call it a cash flow forecast or a business plan, if you will, where you actually sit down and look at how the business is expected to perform with you and then look at the things that you are going to have to be spending money on, like your debt service, et cetera. A lot of businesses out there that have been around for a long time don't have significant debts. And so the seller of that business might be doing quite well for themselves, and they look at the business as a very good one. But if you saddle it with a bunch of debt and then you have to make payments on that, very quickly you end up in what one of my good friends describes as a pair of tight shoes, where all of a sudden now so much of your cash flow has been spoken for between your own income needs, debt service, the need to finance and replace equipment, and then the tax burden of the business, that there's not much room to maneuver. When I look at small business financial statements and I see several years in a row where sales move up and down by 10%, to me, that's flat. I mean, a 10% oscillation in top line revenue can happen in a small business. But here's the thing, depending on the direct inputs of whatever it is that they sell or the service they provide, something as small as a 5 or 6% decline in top line revenue could be a 30% decline in profit, right? Depending on what inputs can be adjusted. And so, you can have a business that is still moving flat as far as performance, and all of a sudden you're in a position where you don't have enough money to take home a full salary because of the obligations you've committed yourself to with respect to debt service and other things. So, I mean, it's risky to be in business. We all know this. We all hear the statistics about failure. The reason people want to buy a business instead of starting one is because you avoid the biggest risk of all, which is the startup risk. The idea that you won't be able to find enough customers quickly enough to reach that break-even point. But if you don't organize and structure your acquisition properly, you can still end up in exactly the same risky position that other business people are in. And even business people that are in business today that have no debt. I have a meeting tomorrow actually with someone that I met with a year and a half ago to talk about selling their business. And now they want to have another consultation with me because the business now is performing really poorly. And they want to know if I can give them some input on ways that they can fix it or if they should close it. So think about that. A year and a half ago, they wanted to talk with me about what their business might sell for. Today they're talking to me, or tomorrow they're going to talk to me about whether they should close it or not. And I think that's a really great example because small businesses close all the time. It's like I said, it's the riskiest asset class out there. I mentioned briefly that they sell for very low multiples. Anyone familiar with stock market investing will know that one of the metrics that you look at when you look at a publicly traded share is the price to earnings, or, how many years worth of earnings am I paying to obtain this stock? And in the stock market, you might be looking at 10 times, 15 times, 20 times, et cetera, right? Well, in the world of these small businesses, we're often looking at, 2 to 3 times these cash flows, whether we're talking about STE or EBITDA. And so that's a very low multiplier. Most small business owners that I speak with about selling their business, when I show them what their business would be worth in a sale, they almost always have the same response, Liam, which is, wow, if I just stayed here for the next couple of years, I'd have the same money and I would still own the business. And they're absolutely correct. So this is what I mean by you don't sell a business to quote unquote cash out. The meat of owning a small business is in the operation. It's in getting things working properly so that you can have a good income and make good profits, get those profits out of the business and build your personal wealth with respect to other assets. Get your retirement accounts, your real estate, your home, your vacation home, like get those other things in order while you own the business. Most people, when it comes time to selling that business, it's because of those pressing personal motivations that I mentioned earlier. It's not because they build a business to quote unquote cash out. That happens very rarely. You're talking about the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 business that has this, rocket propulsion growth in profitability and earnings that could maybe end up becoming a publicly traded business one day. It's such a rare anomaly in the reality of everyday business, that most people are involved in.
Right. So, excuse me. So, we had a session or a panel about this a few years ago, and it was all part. The name of it wasn't this, but it was a lot of it was discussed was building a business to be sold from the beginning. So you should make sure that your business is designed on paper from the very beginning, that you have the right construction, the right foundations on paper so that a business can be sold if it needs to be, but that the best way to operate your business is to build your personal wealth while you're still the owner rather than cashing out.
Yeah, there's a lot of stats floating around out there, and it's really impossible to know accurately, what's going on in this world. And here's why. If you sell a business as a share transaction, well, the details of that transaction are private. The directors of the company may change. So someone's going to file a piece of paper with, the government office that manages that to say the directors of this company have changed. But directors change for a lot of different reasons, not just because a business is sold, right? So they don't know accurately how many businesses would sell as a share transaction. The feds may know because of tax returns filings related to that. But a lot of these small businesses sell as asset sales, meaning that the buyer will create their own new entity, a new corporation, which buys the assets of an existing corporation. So what does the government know about that? Well, they know that someone created a new corporation. So the government may actually record that as a new business startup rather than the sale of a business. And when the seller sells the assets of their business, maybe they wind up that corporation. So the government may record that as a business closure. But oftentimes when there's an asset deal, is you have a buyer creates a new entity who buys the assets of an existing entity, and maybe there are payments that happen over a couple of years to the selling entity, which means that that entity can't be wound up. So now you've got these two entities carrying on together. Maybe after a few years, the selling entity can be wound up. So you see what I mean? Like the data that gets collected about business starts, business closures, a lot of that is intertwined with business sales, and It's very opaque data. We don't really know what's going on. But some of the statistics that get reported, for example, go like this, that 80% of small business owners believe that the sale of their business will be somehow an important function of their retirement plan, right? And then here's another statistic, 80% of businesses that go up for sale never get sold, right? Yeah. So if 80% of people plan on using the proceeds of selling their business for their retirement,
to retire,
and then 80% of the businesses never get sold, right? You can see that people's retirement plans are being knocked off kilter here. And then there's even further minutia or details to that. So while 80% of businesses may not be sold, there's another question. How many are sold as a going concern and how many liquidate in some way? So I'll give you an example. You could, restaurants are an industry that has a very high failure rate. Okay. So you could have a restaurant in a rented location and it may not do well, but it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to build. Put in the plumbing, the exhaust, the equipment, all that kind of stuff. And so the restaurant fails and somebody else wants to start a restaurant and they know that it's cheaper for them to buy an existing restaurant that has already got those fixtures and things installed. It's cheaper for them to buy that than to get a brand new, newly built location that has none of that stuff in place. So a lot of failed restaurants will sell on what's called a redevelopment value because people will say, if I pay 150 grand or 200 grand for this failed restaurant, I'll be saving money versus what it will cost to build one new. Now, the seller who sells his equipment and lets someone take over his lease, has he sold his business?
No.
Or has he just sold some stuff?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you asked him, he would probably say, I sold my business, because nobody likes failure. Right. And I've seen many deals done over the years where the seller gets very little, except they get to tell everyone they sold their business. And in a certain way, they get to kind of save face, right?
Yeah.
Versus simply closing it and ending up with that vacant location and the landlord putting up a for lease sign, right? And so this is one of the things I often say to people is you have no idea what's going on in a business from the outside. There is no way to know from the outside what's happening in any business. You need to really be able to see the financial statements. You need to know what's going on. Do you remember a few years ago there was this craze that went through the region for frozen yogurt places?
Oh, yeah.
Where you would go and you would load them up with different toppings and pay by weighing them?
Yep.
Well, here in Moncton, I think there were like 7 of them that opened in under a year and a half, right? One brand name opened multiple locations. Today, I think there's maybe 1 or 2 in the city.
Yeah.
And, I had people telling me, wow, there must be a lot of money in frozen yogurt. Look at all these places opening up. But the fact that new businesses are opening does not indicate that there's money in that industry.
No.
What it indicates is that there were people willing to make a bet on that industry. And, when you open up a business in a leased location, for example, you borrowed money usually from a bank and they asked for a personal guarantee. And then you rented a commercial spot from a landlord and they usually ask for a personal guarantee, right? And so even if the business isn't making any money, even if this is just marginal, if you have a net worth that is substantial outside of that business, if you own your home, if you have retirement accounts, if you have, all this other stuff, you may not be making money in that business, but it still might make sense for you to keep that business open until your lease comes to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Versus closing it early, salvaging your time, moving on to something else, and face getting sued by the landlord.
Yeah.
Right. And this is something I've seen over and over again where, I would say to a person that wanted to get into the frozen yogurt business, I would say, before you decide to open your own, why don't you contact all the owners in town and find out if any of them would like to sell?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be interesting to find out if any people who have one of these new frozen yogurt places would like to offload it?
Yeah.
Right. And I got the chance to look at one set of financial statements for one of those businesses, and they weren't doing well at all. And now that the years have ticked by, almost all of them have closed. So there wasn't really a lot of money to be made in the frozen yogurt business.
Mm-hmm.
It was just an exciting concept that a lot of people were willing to throw their hat in the ring and get into it, thinking that it was going to pay off for them. And that's different. This is one of the big reasons why I'm a proponent of buying an existing business over starting a business. Because when you buy a business, you actually get to look at the track record, what has been going on here, versus when you start a business, it's all based on your best projections or what you hope to be able to achieve. And in some kind of businesses, you can kind of mitigate those risks by investing in things that retain value. Like if you were going to open up like a construction business and you had to buy an excavator and a dump truck and, a bulldozer and stuff like that. If it didn't work out, those things would hold their value. You could sell them off and you could, pay off your debts and you could probably get out of that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But in some cases, people get into business, they spend huge amounts of money on things that can never be recaptured. Marketing, creating websites and things, maybe inventory that they then find out can't be sold, leasehold improvements for retail type locations that if you don't keep operating, they entirely lose their value overnight, etc.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well,
Sorry, did you want this to be a more optimistic podcast? I'm really sorry, Liam. Am I getting a little bit sour today?
No. This is exactly what I was hoping for. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and the one thing that I try to always come away with the folks that I have on is real actual information that people can use, right? And for entrepreneurs specifically. So before we wrap it up, I just wanted to kind of find out, so this year, 2023, there's so much that's going on right now. I mean, the pandemic is ending, and now we've got this, financial sort of possible recession looming and stuff. But what's taking up most of your time right now? What's next for you? What are you working on the most, or what are you hoping to work on the most in the next, say, coming 12 months?
For me, it's the same stuff that I've always been doing. So it's working one-on-one with buying and selling clients. There's also a coaching group that I run of people that are buying businesses. We meet several times a month. And so their projects are always changing, and I'm helping those people with those things. And so basically it's, there will always be people who suddenly need to sell their business. Mm-hmm. And there will always be people who want to get into business but don't want the risk of a startup. And that there are many buckets of or groups of people that applies to, but largely it's people that are further along in life and they have more responsibilities. So, people that are homeowners and they've got children and they've got all these responsibilities can't really take on the risk of doing that startup. There's more at risk for them than a young person maybe who doesn't have all those responsibilities and obligations. Mm-hmm. And so those people will take entrepreneurship with a little more measured approach. And whether they think of it themselves or they come across the idea someplace else, they will eventually graduate from the idea of doing a startup in some way to the idea of doing an acquisition. Mm-hmm. And even if you have a completely novel idea of a whole new and different kind of business, it can often be far less risky to create that within an existing business. So you go looking for a business that's already profitable, functioning, that has employees, customers, etc., but that it has a lot of common characteristics or resources that could be shared with what it is that you want to start that's new. So this is how large corporations do entrepreneurship. Big companies are always coming up with new things, new ideas, new products, but they do it within the context of their existing organization. And so they really, what's the risk that Nabisco introduces a new food item that doesn't do well? Well, I'm sure they do that a lot. They probably introduce a lot of things that don't do well, hoping for the one thing that will really hit it out of the park. But each one of those failures does not result in individual people ending up going bankrupt. It's
Right.
within the envelope of the greater organization. They already have a lot of the resources in place, and small business can do that too. So I challenge people often to look at their ideas and what they want to do, and just start to ask themselves, if this were to fail, if my idea were to fail, what would the likely cause have been? And then work yourself back from that and think about how you can get into the business and address that likely risk, or get into the business with less personal investment on your own part. And I'll give you a quick example. I was talking with someone who wanted to start a business doing a particular kind of service. And so they were going to require a whole bunch of equipment to be able to get into this service business. And I asked them what the competitive landscape was like, and I asked them if there were competitors in other cities that wouldn't be direct competitors. He said they were. And so I suggested this to him. I said, why don't you pretend that you're in this business? Why don't you pretend that you offer this service and start marketing yourself and start making sales? And if you do get a job, sub it to one of these guys in the next town, and just see how successful you can be at selling that service. Because if you can't succeed at selling the service, then you will know you shouldn't invest in getting the equipment yourself. But if you suddenly are able to achieve good success with the sales effort and people want to do business with you, then you know that the market really exists. It's one step beyond market research. It's actually going out and making sales and figuring out how to deliver for the customer without making the investment yourself. And that's just one example of sort of a mental exercise I try to do when I'm working with people.
Right. What's the coaching group called? You said that you were working on or had a coaching group. How would somebody go about finding that?
Yeah. So for anyone who's interested in buying a business, the place to go is businessbuyeradvantage.com. And there's a short video there, and I describe the different things that I do to help people. One of them is an online course. It's about 14 hours of content that people can go through that is all about how to buy a business. And on that same page, the next thing down is the coaching program, which is called Business Buyer Adventure. And there's anywhere between 20 and 30 people in that group at any given time. And people from all over the world, largely North America, are in it. And what's great about it is that you actually get to sit in and be a part of the conversations where other people are working on their deals. So you get to learn from other people's examples. It's been going since 2018. And so people who join today have access to all the old recordings of everything that's happened before. And, it's a huge archive of experience because you get to see what really goes into this. When people describe something like buying a business on a podcast or online, you get this sanitized Coles Notes version at the end of the deal, and this is what we did, and this is how it ended up done. But when you have a group like this and you're having conversations between buyers and sellers, you get a whole new perspective on this. So, for example, one of the members in the group, Jordan, he was looking at buying a business, and he was already in the industry, and he was looking to grow through acquisition. And so he started talks with the seller. They spoke for a few weeks, and then it broke off because her expectations were completely out of whack with what he was willing to pay for the business. Then a couple months later, they started talking again, and then it broke down again. And then a third time, they started talking again, and then it broke down again. And then finally, a fourth time, they started talking again, And this time it led ultimately to the deal.
Mm-hmm.
From the time they first met to the time the deal was closed was 13 months.
Wow.
And so when you're listening to these call recordings, you can listen to 13 months worth of calls over the course of like a week of jogging or driving your car or what have you, right? You can catch up through all that time, but you gain a real appreciation for what these things actually look like. One of the mistakes that buyers will make is they'll go out into the marketplace and they won't find exactly what they want available. And so then they'll get the impression that good businesses are something that's hard to come by. And they'll develop a scarcity mindset. Mm-hmm. And when you have a scarcity mindset and you see a business that looks half decent, you then want to pursue it. You say, I don't want to let this one get away. I got to do this deal. And it's when you start to pursue that you lose your leverage. Mm. And for someone who wants to buy a business, the only point of leverage they have is their ability to not do a deal, right. Their willingness to walk away and say no. And so people will get this enthusiasm, this excitement. They'll chase a deal and then they'll end up paying too much. They won't get the right terms. They won't, they'll miss out on their opportunity to get a good deal for themselves. When you create a system for search so that you are consistently getting new opportunities to look at businesses that may be available to you, you will start to see that there's a lot of businesses out there. Mm-hmm. And you'll understand that it makes a lot more sense to preserve your resources and do the right deal in the right way so that you end up with a good, profitable, successful business that's going to ensure your ongoing profitability rather than just doing any deal you can get your hands on. And things like the recordings of past conversations in this group really help to illustrate that to people, because you can see people that will do one deal after another that all fall apart, and then they'll end up with a really great deal. And you'll realize, wow, that it was totally worth their while to spend 12 months on those other deals just to put themselves in a position where they were able to do this one. Mm-hmm. And there's other people who do one deal after another and are able to find the great deals and do them with relative speed. One guy in the group just bought his 21st business.
Wow.
So there's a range of people in there, from people who want to do one deal and then they want to manage that business full time. And then there are other people who are building themselves sort of these portfolios of companies, and other people that are growing their business through acquisition. So they're tucking in the new businesses into their existing framework. Mm-hmm. And there's other people who are buying other businesses and keeping them separate. Mm. So it's a wide swath of entrepreneurial endeavor that's going on right there.
Incredible. Well, this has been an awesome amount of learning for me, and I'm sure for the people who are listening as well. I wanted to say thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you at the Enterpriser conference as well. I'm looking forward to the session.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it as well.
All right, thanks very much. I really do appreciate you, and we'll chat again soon.
All right, Liam, have a great day.
You too.